Another suicide rocking Missouri politics. Frustrated by lack of action on increasing the minimum wage, is Kansas City about to go it alone? Plus, which is more of a threat to local residents? Payday lenders or Uber drivers? We size up the state of Johnson County and the state of Kansas City. And why are there plans to shake up how you vote in Kansas? Those stories, plus a closer look at what's at stake in the city council elections in Kansas City, straight ahead. Hello, I'm Nick Haynes, making sense of our news this week. Kansas City Star political columnist and the host of Up to Date on KCUR-FM, Steve Kraske. From the Pitch newspaper, Steve Vockrodt. From The Call, senior writer Eric Wesson. And Star reporter, columnist and blogger Dave Helling. The news sounded implausible just weeks after Missouri State Auditor and candidate for governor Tom Schweik takes his own life. His aide and communications chief Spence Jackson is found dead in his Jefferson City apartment of a single gunshot wound to the head. Jefferson City police say they found a note close by on a living room table.
It says, "I'm so sorry. I just can't take being unemployed again." That is the note. That is the note in its entirety.
Tens of thousands, though, of Americans are fired, laid off every single day, but they don't decide to end their lives. Is there more to this, Steve Kraske?
Well, we don't know, Nick, if there is more to this story or not, and trying to dive into the depths of depression and the darkness of that and the desperation that's involved with that is a place, fortunately, I've never been, and I feel badly for folks like Spence who apparently have been in that place. We don't know if there's more to this story. It's just so sad. Those of us who knew Spence and worked with him for any number of years, he was spokesman for former Governor Matt Blunt, and enjoyed his personality, enjoyed who he was. It's just a sad deal.
And beyond all of the politics of this, we have two very smart, intelligent men who decided, even though they would have known about all of the resources that are available, we have so much today in terms of suicide prevention, all of these suicide hotlines. We've done 1 million programs on this station about this. And yet they believed somehow that those resources were not for them, Dave Helling.
Yes, and it's a mystery, even today, why they didn't reach out. In fact, I talked to some Republicans who knew Spence Jackson well on Monday, and they said a couple of things. First, friends were trying to find him another job. He had a network of people who could find employment for him. I think that Spence was a little worried that once he left the auditor's office, he was so identified with the Schweik wing of the party that he would struggle to find good work with the other people in the Republican Party in Missouri who were working with other candidates or other administrations potentially. That might have worried him a little bit. The second thing is that most of the people I talked with said that they were not shocked about Tom Schweik's suicide. Surprised, yes, but Tom was an interesting, unique personality. Even his friends said that. But they were absolutely flabbergasted by Spence Jackson's decision.
And the timing right next to each other indeed. There, Steve Vockrodt.
Right, and suicide is such a deeply personal, deeply complicated, often irrational fact. And I know that politics has sort of been swirling around this whole issue, particularly with the Schweik suicide. But suicide is often not just a one-factor decision. And Spence Jackson's note talks about unemployment, but there could be other things that we don't know about in both suicides and that we'll never know about, and it's just a terribly sad situation.
It was explained to me once that really suicide is a disease of the eyes, that you can't actually see any other option available to you. That is the only thing available to you. But beyond we've talked about this aspect, but in terms of the political world, what does this do now to politics in Missouri? Does it change anything, Steve?
Yes, it roils it, Nick, absolutely. Look at what's happened just in the last week. We've had what appears to be a gubernatorial candidacy from a former Navy SEAL, Eric Greitens. St. Louis businessman John Bruner now is forming an exploratory committee. We have candidates running to fill the void left by Tom Schweik. Catherine Hanaway, who remains the frontrunner for the GOP nomination, appears to be affected by all of this bad news. She had ties to those who, in her campaign, who are said to be behind some of the problems that Tom Schweik was experiencing. She's taken on maybe a little water as a result of that. this is not where Republicans want to be as they head into what's going to be a very competitive election year for governor, for the U.S. Senate. They need to be united, and they're not right now, Nick.
And one of the untold stories about, or slightly told stories about Republicans in Missouri is that they've been at war in one way or another for many, many years. And there are some hard feelings, have been for many, many years between the various wings of the party. Those hard feelings are beginning to really solidify and become highly personal to the point where you can see some parts of the Republican Party refusing to even talk to the other parts. We've talked about Jeff Rowe on this program. The anger at Jeff Rowe is very high. The anger at John Hancock, the Missouri Republican chairman, remains high and personal. And it is hard to see, Nick, in the wake of the Spence Jackson tragedy, how those bridges can be reformed. It isn't as if a year from now you can say, oh, let's go have a beer and we'll talk out our differences. And in that sense, you get the idea that the Republican Party in Missouri will really struggle with this for the next 18 months, and we'll see what impact it has on the various statewide races.
Well, in other news this week, Kansas City Mayor Sly James picked Starlight Theater to deliver his final State of the City address before he faces voters for a second time on Tuesday.
I'm very proud to be mayor of a city that's clearly reinventing itself. Flyover country no more. Kansas City is the center of the American Renaissance. We are the city that cities now look to for ideas on how to fight crime, how to get kids reading at grade level at 3rd grade, how to innovate governmental processes, how to grow the economy in the right ways.
An excerpt from James's 55-minute speech on the enclosed stage at Starlight. But what did we learn new, if anything, from his address this week, Eric Wesson?
Well, we learned that the city was going to start a push for increasing minimum wage. We learned the usual rhetoric. The crime is down, or homicides are down. Crime really isn't down, but homicides are down. The shooters just didn't shoot as well, and first responders did an excellent job when they got people to research intrusions. But all in all, I don't think we learned a whole lot more that we didn't already know.
Actually, we just missed the back of your head in that camera shot there, because you were sitting there too, Steve Ockrott.
Right. Eric mentioned the push for minimum wage. I thought that was probably the most interesting thing. Sly James called for the Missouri legislature to increase minimum wage, which is at $7.65 an hour currently. There's an ordinance that's been introduced by Jermaine Reed to increase the minimum wage. However, that's the Missouri General Assembly's responsibility. There's a law that says that cities cannot raise it on their own or cannot exceed the state's level. So it would be a statewide effort. This at least gets the conversation not started, but going once again.
But there are some cities, though, that have done that. Seattle is one of them.
Yeah.
So what is the difference there, that they were able to do that unilaterally?
Well, Seattle's in Washington. The Missouri state law says clearly that cities cannot exceed what the state has set out for minimum wage.
Yes.
And I think Ed Ford brought that point up at their planning and zoning meeting the other day, and he got blasted by some of the clergy here in the area about being able to do it. I think St. Louis did it, and then they had another problem with trying to uphold it.
Steve.
Nick, Sly James doesn't need any political help here. He's a heavy, heavy favorite to win in the primary and then also go on to the general election and win that. But talk about manna from heaven for a politician, a 55-minute platform with every TV camera in the city a week before your primary election. That's a beautiful thing for a politician. And Sly James didn't dive into any deep-seated issues facing this community like racism or the city debt or, future of streetcar, those kinds of heavy issues. He could take this opportunity to talk about the Renaissance, flyover country no more. That was the money quote out of this speech. A great
also,
money
we did a good
quote.
job then by getting that one. And
Yeah,
that
a great money quote and an optimistic speech from top to bottom. That's what you want to be, the place you want to be as a politician just a few days before an election.
We talked about the State of the City address, but what about the State of Johnson County address? Why is there so much attention to James's speech than the one delivered last week by the head of Johnson County government, Ed Eilert?
The lesson etched in our community's history and legacy of leadership is very clear. You cannot stand still. You must move forward, and you must invest for the future.
The head of Johnson County government giving his State of the County address at the Ritz-Charles in Overland Park last week. Johnson County has 100,000 more people living there than in Kansas City, Missouri. Yet a simple Google News search finds 3 times as many news stories about Sly James's speech than the one Eilert gave. Why is that, Dave Helling?
Well, perhaps Ed Eilert isn't an electric speaker. No, that has nothing. In fact, I talked with Ed a little bit earlier this week about his tenure out there, and he seems to be in a pretty good place. Part of it is Johnson County is a very diffuse county, lots of municipalities. The hope for the Johnson County chair many years ago when it was instituted in Johnson County is to put the person in that position, man or woman, on an equal footing with the mayor of Kansas City, but it really hasn't worked out that way. The mayor in Kansas City remains, and I wrote a column about this, primarily a public relations head for the city of Kansas City, and in that sense speeches like that get attention because that's kind of his job. With Eilert and others, it's more sort of a technical execution, collect taxes, make sure the jail is running, and so there just isn't the dynamism in a speech like that.
But it's not like there's not huge numbers of issues in Johnson County. We've heard on this program about the King Louis bowling alley and efforts to make that into an art gallery and the spending of millions of dollars, and people were upset about that. And then they were going to build Luce Park in Johnson County, basically, and that was the taking over of the Meadowbrook Country Club and making that one of the biggest parks in Johnson County as well. So these are big issues with lots of money involved. So there are things that are happening there.
Yeah, there are a lot of things happening. I think part of the reason that Eilert's speech maybe doesn't get quite as much attention, and I went and I saw it and I talked with him a little bit afterwards. You know, county government, I think, is a little bit elusive for a lot of folks. And, you know, Eilert talked about a lot of things like education. And, county government isn't directly tied with things like education. Part of it, too, is the media is concentrated in downtown Kansas City, Missouri. That's where my office is. That's where these guys' offices are. And there isn't as much of the presence in Johnson County. You tend to cover what's closer to you. But you're right, there are a lot of significant issues in Johnson County, and Eilert touches on some of them.
Let me hop on my horse here for a moment. Dave's right. Ed Eilert is not an electric personality. He also missed a terrific opportunity. He doesn't use the platform he's been given as the head of Johnson County government. He spent a quarter of his speech roughly talking about the importance of education, vital to Johnson County, vital to its future. Did not take one moment to address the state legislature and cuts to education and the threat to public schools going forward in his county, which is the foundation for Johnson County government. If someone like Ed Eilert can't stand and use a platform like this with an audience like this to address that issue, he's really missing a bet here, and someone needs to light a fuse under Ed and get him to talk about those critical issues to his home county.
But wouldn't a better comparison be Jackson County speech versus Johnson County speech rather than Kansas City? Because Kansas City's got a lot more issues, as you said earlier, than Johnson County. And Johnson County is considered pretty elitist, if that's the right word to use for it.
I live there, Eric, so please be
well,
careful.
both of y'all do.
Yeah, yeah.
But the comparison would be a lot different for them than it would be for Kansas City.
Okay. Well, yeah, Steve?
Well, I think Steve's right. I think Ed Eilert did miss an opportunity to talk about the legislature's effect on education, particularly because the conversation in Johnson County is really changing among members of the legislature, at least some of them. You have a state senator and a guy like Jeff Melcher who is not shy about talking about, no longer is the discussion about let's protect education spending. It's increasingly about these schools have plenty of money, they're just not spending it wisely.
Can I just say briefly, there is a theme that I heard from my discussion with Ed earlier in the week and what Mayor James talked about in the State of the City, and that is that local governments in Kansas and Missouri are growing increasingly irritated and frustrated with mandates from their state capitals. Mm-hmm. The minimum wage is just one part of that. And you get the sense that they might be able to get Ed Eilert, Sly James, Mike Sanders, for that matter, might be able to, Mark Holland, to get together and sort of say to state legislators, look, you can't keep telling us how to operate our cities with impunity. They're growing very concerned with and frustrated on gun legislation, a whole range of things that the power is being taken away from by the state, from the cities. And by the way, it's the same state lawmakers who complain about the federal government hammering them all the time, in essence telling local governments what to do. That could be a theme for the next year or two in our metropolitan area.
Big changes are ahead for Kansas City, Missouri government. While last week we dissected the mayor's race, because of term limits, half the city council will be made up of fresh faces. Names like Ed Ford, Cindy Serco, Jan Markison and John Sharp have become really familiar to us, but they'll be gone. What's at stake in Tuesday's election as voters go to the polls to pick their replacements, Eric?
I was watching the monitor.
I know you are, because it was scintillating graphics that we have here. What is at stake in this election?
Oh, it's leadership, direction, economic development for some of those areas, and also what's at stake is public safety, what we're going to do with it. As you noticed at the forum the other day, one of the things that they all talked about was we spend too much money on public safety. So how are they going to redirect those dollars if they're able to, because people want to see police cars, they want to be able to feel safe. So how do they redirect those dollars?
I will say, as I moderate a lot of those forums, a lot of bashing of Johnson County by candidates in those forums too.
Yeah.
But yes, Dave.
One of the things that will clearly be at least a short-term impact of the council races this summer when they take office in August is more power for the mayor or more authority for the mayor, because when you have a turnover of half the body, those council members will take at least some time to sort of get their feet on the ground. I think that's over-exaggerated in some ways, but by and large it does, in the second term of a mayor, when you have that kind of turnover, it really does put more authority in his or her hands. I think we'll see that going forward, which is why I've suggested in columns and other places that council races might be staggered rather than elect an entire new council every 4 years. A, so that phenomenon doesn't happen, and B, it gives the voter a chance to really study the candidates. Kansas City voters have 7 decisions to make when they go to the polls. That's, at minimum 14 candidates. Yeah. That's a tough hurdle for many of them.
I've been moderating a lot of these forums, and you've got about 30 candidates sometimes on stage.
Right.
It is impossible to try and navigate all of this. So, I mean, are there some general themes that have been popping up, Steve Ockrott?
Well, I think one of the big things that's at stake with this election is, because you're going to have so much turnover on the city council, it's going to influence the mayor's second term. I mean, let's be honest, Sly James is going to win a second term. So he's got some big plans for things that are going to come up in that second term. He's talked about a convention hotel. That's a major project. Things like a streetcar expansion. You're going to have some new council members who are going to have some fresh and maybe different ideas on where the city should go with that. And with the mayor being termed out and people starting to think about maybe wanting to become mayor when he's done, they're probably going to have some more bolder positions about things like that than the current council.
I think Steve's hitting the nail on the head. How much support will Mayor James have going forward for his agenda? That's very much on the line with these elections. Streetcar system, Mayor James wants to go and build on that. That's his legacy. Every mayor in this town sort of has to have a major capital improvement to sort of look at and brag about. Streetcars is what Mayor James, where he's hanging his hat. Downtown Convention Hotel, and people are also talking about.
But Eric gave me the privilege of co-hosting the Cole Forum last week, and when we asked all of the candidates basically about would you vote for streetcar expansion in the next 4 years, didn't they basically all say no?
They all said no. And one other thing that the new election will do will be leadership in committees. I think one of the things that Jermaine Reed in the 3rd District is running on is that he'll be a senior member of the council, so now he'll have a committee. And that's one of the things that hasn't happened, because in the 3rd District it's one and done, so they've never had a consistency in there, and none of those people have ever been in a leadership
Just very
role.
quickly, don't forget the airport, whatever we're going to do at the airport and streetcar. But votes of the people will be involved in both of those issues, so the exact role of the council isn't completely clear. Ultimately, the voters will decide the fate of both of those things.
But they have to sell it to the people.
No, I get that. And what they really have to sell, by the way, and what we really need to keep our eyes on is the earnings tax renewal next year. year.
That's a
it
good
passed
point.
80% last time, but you do get the sense that there is some members of the community saying, is this the best possible way to raise revenue? That'll be an important vote.
Including the candidate who is running against Mayor Sly James, Clay Chastain, who wants to phase out the earnings tax.
Yeah, right.
Okay. You may not be aware that payday loans are on Tuesday's ballot in Kansas City. Should the city impose a $1,000 fee on payday lenders to offset the costs of inspecting them? What do we need to know about this issue before we head into the polling station? Can anybody tell me that, Eric?
That the payday lenders are pass that cost on to the consumers that come in to get loans. I've talked to several managers of payday lending places, and they don't have a problem with it. They're just saying that they'll pass it on to the consumers because there's a cap, but it doesn't really affect the amount of money that those people
Meaning
will come on.
400% interest rates.
It'll go to 401.
Doesn't cover. They
Yeah,
need to raise it even beyond that, eh?
Yeah.
Now, the city may be imposing just a $1,000 fee on payday lenders. So what does that say about how much the city cares for these new ride booking services like Uber? The city wants to charge the ride booking service an annual fee of $40,000 and then ask drivers to pay a yearly $100 fee. So this is 40 times the inspection costs of what they're charging the payday lenders. Steve?
Well, it's not apples and oranges. I think Uber's kind of a different concept than your typical taxi fare, and the big discussion right now is trying to get how do we handle this new type of service that isn't kind of slips through the regulations that we have already in place. And Uber's talked at some points about, well, if you impose these kinds of regulations and fees on us, we may leave. I think they're kind of backing away from that now because I think they want to be in Kansas City, but they're trying to increase their margins as much as possible.
But they were saying the drivers, even a $100 fee, that would be too much for many of these drivers. They would go into another line of work for $100 a year, Steve?
Yeah, well, I think the city's really playing with fire on this one, Nick. I mean, a lot of people, they like Uber. They like using this service. And if Kansas City loses it, this new image that Mayor James wants to create for our city will take a hit because young urban professionals want this service.
And Uber people say that the mayor uses it when he goes out of town. Washington, D.C., they have it there, and they said, well, he uses it when he goes out of town, so why is it such
But the other argument
issue
of this
there?
is an equity issue, isn't it? And the taxi drivers are saying everybody needs to be treated fairly. Why do they have to abide by a certain set of rules, and this new service coming into town does not?
Right, and Kansas, by the way, is also dealing with this on the statewide level, or at least some discussion of how to deal with these new approaches. And it's a broader issue than just Uber, I almost said Uber and taxi services. It's a broader discussion of how the regulatory framework will fit around 21st century businesses rather than 20th century businesses. The idea of hailing a cab on the corner is really going away. And so legislators across the country are having to understand, okay, how do you then put a framework around these new services that younger people like, use, maybe cheaper, based on digital technology, by the way. And it's clear that Kansas City and Kansas have not completely reached an understanding on how to deal with that yet.
But one of the things that's interesting about the conversation when you're dealing with transportation is now the city council is going to have the conversation of setting up exclusivity that Yellow Cab has at the hotels and other places around the city. So why not open it and make it more competitive and create this other avenue for people to choose from? And I think it's going to be a very, very, very interesting conversation as it goes, because the owner of Yellow Cabs makes some substantial contributions to political campaigns.
Bill
as
George
well.
is very, very well known at City Hall, always has been.
Kansas City just changed its municipal election to warm weather months, which means the mayoral and city council primary election, which normally would take place in February, is now taking place on Tuesday of next week, the general election in June. Republicans in the Kansas legislature are pushing a similar move. The governor is calling for changing local elections to the fall when more people vote, and his office is using some local election results here as evidence of why the move is necessary. Governor Brownback's office shows that in elections earlier this month in Johnson County that decided several local mayoral, school board, and city council races. The average turnout of eligible voters in the county was less than 6%. In Wyandotte County, where 2 critical seats on the unified government were up for grabs, fewer than 10% of eligible voters turned out. These are where your school board candidates and other important local influences are being decided, and nobody seems to care. So does it make sense to move these elections to the fall, Steve?
Well, I think anything you can do to improve upon a 6% voter turnout, Nick, needs to be looked at. I mean, this is getting scary if no one shows up at the polls ever to vote for these things. These are important offices, as you point out. I think the right honorables need to be even more aggressive at looking at ways to boost turnout. Mail-in voting, we're going to talk about that. Weekend voting, extending the voting period over a number of days instead of just, one day, more advanced voting, all these different kinds of tools that are out there. A lot of Republicans still resistant to that idea in both states, but that's where we need to be.
Steve.
Well, there's a couple things going on with this. There's some thinking that if these elections get moved over into fall elections when there's also national elections going on, that it would also make them into partisan type elections, which
Exactly right.
the Republicans in Kansas certainly like that idea, since they seem to be pretty dominant in Kansas. The other concern about this is if you start piling races, let's take Wyandotte County, for example, where Mark Gilstrap in the primary beat Nathan Barnes by 1 vote in a low turnout election. If you had more people, you may not get such thin margins, but there's some concern that races like the county commission and things further down the ballot like the Board of Public Utilities will get even less attention than they do now because they're paired up in races that include the president, Senate.
But in this proposal,
like
they would actually be at the very top of the ballot. The local races would be at the top of the ballot, so that would elevate these local races,
Well,
Dave.
maybe. I mean, it's not clear that voters would know much more about the BPU candidate or the school board candidate if you held the election in the fall rather than in the spring. We do have too many elections, Nick. That's one of the reasons you don't have great turnout, because you'll vote 3, 4, 5 times a year. That's a lot for almost
Very
anybody.
briefly, Eric, just because we've moved these mayoral elections now to the warmer months, do you think the turnout is going to increase on Tuesday?
No, because
Less than 4 years ago.
I mean, the candidates aren't
All right.
exciting.
That is our Week in Review. Thanks to our news reviewers. I'm Nick Haynes. From all of us at KCPT, good night.